how do you get that next level promotion if you never talk about yourself being worthy of it or asking for it, right?
Used to work in robotics. I'd love to hear a bit more about that. What did you do? What was your involvement?
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I really wanted to build the future. And that's something that got me into engineering in the first place. So it was a very nebulous concept, creating the future. But I thought building robots would be it, you know? And that's why I studied control engineering and robotics in Wrocław, Poland, where I'm originally from. And I did end up working as a robotics engineer for this robotics company in Poland that was working together with a few universities across Europe. By We were building basically robots sponsored by European Union. So it's kind of like for anyone in EU knows about those EU projects and the sponsorship. For those who are located maybe in the States where I'm located right now, it would be like an equivalent of like a DARPA sponsored project, basically. And I quickly realized that building robots was not what I thought it was going to be. I mean, it was fun, but it took a long time and I didn't have the patience, right? Because I was working with a team of mechanical and electrical engineers. I did a tiny little bit of coding, but just like a tiny, tiny little bit. I was more of a project manager. And it just took forever to build those robots, let alone program them. And I thought I wanted more impact. So I quickly moved to becoming a software engineer because one, it was more impactful, right? I mean, at a touch of a button, you deploy your product and it's in millions of hands. Like, how cool is that? Whereas the robots that I was participating in building would be probably touched by like 5 to 10 PhD students somewhere in a university for like a few years because technology moves fast and it gets outdated really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't worked on robotics outside of computer games, but I've done a few hardware and software projects, and I feel you on that. It was painful knowing that we want the hardware to develop on. When's it going to be here? It's like, well, it's going to take 6 to 8 months to develop the hardware, and then you'll get the
Exactly.
prototype board. Like, but I can just hit deploy now, and that software goes. We want to do it
Exactly.
now. We want to ship fast, and that quick iteration and feedback and that. Well, that is quick if we do it in 6 months. Like, no, I'm totally on board there. One to deploy fast. So, why was it, I don't know, robotics that drew you to shaping the future? I mean, there were so many things. I think you mentioned 10, 15 years ago. So, the internet was still fairly new. There was Web 2 was kind of the hype at the time. A lot of different things. What was the attraction about robotics?
So I went into college in 2008. And basically, at the time, the most difficult subject that I could get myself into in Poland was control engineering and robotics. It was like this prestigious thing to study. And, robots sound super futuristic. So I was like, yes, I'm an ambitious person. I get super awesome grades. I'm going to rock this thing. And it seems like it's hard. So, like, yes, let's do this. That's
So,
basically what drew me into robotics at that point in time, with this
so,
idea of, again, creating the future.
so you looked at life and went, I want to play it on hard mode. I want to do the hard thing.
Yeah, I find that life is much more rewarding whenever you really challenge yourself and pursue things that are ambitious.
Yeah, I agree. If we don't push ourselves, we don't take on new challenges, we don't grow, do we?
Exactly.
So, one more thing on AI before I talk about growth. We were talking a little bit before we hit record about AI, and I was saying that I'm huge enthusiastic and a huge skeptic at the same time because AI is what drew me to software engineering as a 9-year-old kid. Well, not software engineering then, but playing with computers, and eventually led to me software engineering. But in that time, I've got a bit of grey hair. I've been around for 40 odd years. I've seen the AI winters. Not all of them. Some of them before I was born. I've seen the hype. I've seen every 10 years we get software engineers replaced by AI. What's been your feeling on that? What's been your experience through both being a student, working in robotics, and your thoughts now?
So I did mention before we started that one of my professors that was leading an AI class back in, I think, 2010, he would say that AI has been the biggest disappointment of the 20th century. And he was probably right. I mean, let's think about it. What makes AI today amazing is the fact that there's tons of data to train it on. And back then in, 2010, like that wasn't really the case. So it was hard to develop robust models because there was not enough data to train them on. And that's kind of like my one fun memory of AI, and that professor saying that. Such a huge contrast with today's reality where, AI is said to replace software engineers. I don't think that's going to happen, at least not anytime soon. I see AI more like a tool, right? And it's a phenomenal tool, but you have to know how to use it. So it's really about being smart on how do you use the tools that you have available to you in order to solve problems. And we could talk a little bit more about this whole concept here. And I think you'll agree with me, John, that software engineer at a core is a problem solver, right? We use tech and tools that tech provides to solve problems. And that's really the core of what we do as engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. And coding, the bit that AI is famed at the moment for being in two places for, is a small part in that.
Exactly. Like
We've got
there's
to
so much
understand the
more.
problem. I saw, not for the first time, but was reminded a couple of days ago now about the Einstein quote, which I'm struggling to remember. But it was something like if he had an hour to save the world, he'd spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes tackling it.
There you go.
And that's what seems to have been forgotten in a lot of this hype about AI and how it's going to, is that yes, it can produce the code, it can do the last 5 minutes, but what about that first 5 minutes of understanding the problem, that analysis, that talking to other people and figuring out, well, what is it you want to build? What problem are we trying to solve? And what does good look like? And if I'm really honest, throughout the last 30 nearly years of my career, that's always been the problem. How do we get good requirements from customers? How do we even talk to customers and get good requirements, or users, or product owner, whoever it may be that's fulfilling that role? How do we actually get clear requirements, and how do we get things that are unambiguous and understand what people really want and actually solve the right problem? I think AI could help with that, and could we can have a dialogue with it and ask questions and perhaps use it to tease out and ask us questions, but it's still going to need that human in the loop somewhere. We can cut
Exactly.
out maybe some of the line of code, but there's a lot of problem solving to still be had.
Yes, and I think you bring a great point too that, we work with other humans to create products for other humans. So that human aspect that has so much more nuance to it than what AI can currently grasp. Talking about empathy, talking about understanding sarcasm, talking about like understanding human emotion. AI can do that, and I don't think it will be able to do it for a very long time.
Yeah, and it's that understanding that's so key. I posted on LinkedIn the other day. See, I've got a guitar behind me. I'm into guitars. I'm left-handed. I play guitar left-handed, or at least I try to. I asked AI to draw a left-handed guitarist. It has no concept of what a left-handed guitarist
Huh.
is. So every single picture was a right-handed guitarist. Even when you correct it, saying no, that guitarist is playing the guitar right-handed, it says, "I'm sorry, here's a left-handed guitarist," and gives you another right-handed guitarist.
Of
So
course, the models that
it's
it's
in,
been trained on are only the right-handed guitarists, right? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And there's, I think the numbers are about 1% of guitarists play guitar left-handed. If I'd realised that, I would have been smarter and tried really hard to play right-handed. But there we go. But it has no concept. It doesn't understand left and right-handed. There's no understanding there. Yes, that incredible amount of data you mentioned, and now the power we have with GPUs to process that data, means it can do some amazing things. And the pictures it generated are fantastic and incredible quality, but it doesn't really understand what they are. It's just labels against that source data.
But I also like that you brought up the training idea, right? And I want to bring up here this concept that I love to talk about too is that human brain also works that way, right? We are being trained on our lived experience. So just like we train AI on like set data, that the same thing happens to us. And the way I see brain is like a system that is very similar to computer code and one that you can reprogram if there are things that don't work the way you'd want them to.
You did a much better segue into talking about what you do than I was planning to there. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was going to ask you about, you describe yourself as a brain optimization coach, so that leads brilliantly onto it. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I help my clients debug the inefficiencies and hidden bugs that are hidden in that mental code we just talked about, the one hidden in between our ears. And I find it fascinating that a lot of the time, whenever we're facing challenges or obstacles in our lives, really at the core, the problem is you. It's the human. It's how you think. It's how you create meaning to what is happening around you and how you perceive things to be, which is a result of how you've lived your life, right? How your brain has been trained to think based on that data of lived experience that trained you. But what it means is that if you find other kinds of experiences, different perspectives, different ways of thinking, you can change how you think. You can reprogram that code sitting right here, the legacy mental code that's often buggy and spaghetti, and you can improve it to get past those challenges and those obstacles.
Yeah, that ties nicely back to AI. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years about bias in AI. And that bias comes from the fact that we feed it bias training data. And why
Exactly.
do we feed it bias training data? Partly because it's easy to get, partly because we don't recognize the bias, because that bias looks like our own biases. There's a great documentary, I'm struggling to remember the name of, a couple of years ago, that looked at bias in AI. And you can see it time and again in how we think about things, how we approach things. A lot of people think that guitar is a light-handed instrument. To
That's such a
personal
great
bugbear.
example. Yeah, it's such a great example, though. I wouldn't have thought about it.
Yeah. And, we say that in all these different things, that our biases creep through and they can prevent us from, as you say, thinking things the right way. And if we challenge our models and we can have the flexibility that may have as we like to say in software and in IT, that strong opinion weakly held, we can actually generally be weakly hold them. We can change our minds, can't we? We can learn. We can start to stare our biases in the face. So how do you help people tackle that? Because it's really hard to change. We are the product of those biases.
So, the first thing I do with my clients is to invite them to welcome feedback in. And feedback, if you think about it, really is just a piece of information. A lot of the time, whenever we get feedback, let's say in a peer review or in a performance review, or get feedback from people that work with us or live around us, a lot of the time we get defensive, right? Because we feel attacked. There are certain psychological defenses at play that are being raised, and those guards are there to protect us. But once we start breaking down like how those processes are being kicked off in our brain and we see them for what they are, which is again an evolutionarily created process to help you as a human being survive, then we can kind of like take that step back, take a different perspective, and see feedback for what it is. Just a piece of information that you as a person can do whatever it is that you want to do about it. You can completely ignore it, or you can find the things that might help you achieve your goals in the future and then incorporate it in your ways of being and your ways of doing. So, really, to kind of like maybe help understand my process, I would like to take a quick step back here, John, because back in 2019, and it's kind of like a crucial reason of how I coach my clients the way I do, Back in 2019, in this beautiful September day, I walk into the office. At that point, I was a senior software engineer and I had a one on one with my manager. I entered that meeting. We're having just a regular conversation about, skilling up, my goals, how are things going? And all of a sudden, I break into tears. And I feel embarrassed sometimes still talking about it because it was just such an unexpected thing. Like, I see myself as a professional person who comes into work to do work and someone who can keep their emotions at bay, right? And that just like came out of nowhere. But the reality is, I was experiencing at the time depression, burnout, and some other things I haven't quite dealt with, kind of like added in, sprinkled on top, all of this mess. And I couldn't hold it in anymore. So my manager actually told me about her therapist, and I started going to therapy. And I saw so many parallels in talk therapy to what I would do in my day job as an engineer when I'm debugging issues that it just kind of clicked, right? So a lot of the time I talk to my clients about debugging their mental code, where we examine the beliefs, the thoughts that are running through our head. Because a lot of the time we think of our thoughts as true. A lot of the thoughts that are running through our heads are just a print log of what's going in our head. It's not true, right? And so I like to think of coaching process as this debugging of mental models, except instead of scanning file by file, line by line, as we do as software engineers, what we do here is we examine the limiting beliefs, the stories we tell ourselves, the thoughts that are running through our heads. So we start by creating this awareness of how our mental code works, which is exactly the same process we do whenever we're debugging, right? And a lot of the time, because we have this kind of point of reference, like you don't go to the office to refactor a piece of code being all emotionally charged because a line in a file said something, right? But that happens whenever we are working with our mental code. But once we can understand how those mechanisms kind of work within us, it's so much easier to take a step back and see more objectively, and then change a few things. And I've noticed you've been cracking up, John, at my metaphors. Sounds like they resonate.
Yeah, it absolutely resonates. It's so true. There are so many things in life where if we just step back a little bit and think, well, what's the landscape look like? What's the issue that we're dealing with? What's the actual information we've got? Detach it from how we emotionally feel about it. What's the information we've got? Why this didn't work? Why this did work? And I think one of the things that we missed a lot with Agile and with many other things now is we get emotionally involved in them. Whereas I always quite liked Scrum when it was first presented, from the emphasis on those feedback cycles, and that we have that daily stand up and we get feedback, and that information, it's a data point that we can use to analyze and course correct.
Exactly.
And we have a sprint and iteration, whatever you call it, but then we have the review at the end. Now again, we look at our data dispassionately and go, what do we learn from that? What feedback does that give us? How can we improve? And I love that way of looking at everything, and that's what I like about these things. And I think that a lot of them have got lost. We have various different, games and ceremonies now that have been introduced by certification and different consultants and coaches. And instead of focusing on what's the information, what can we learn from it, how can we then apply that? How can we debug our process and adapt it to be better suiting our team? How can we debug our mental models? How can we debug our code? How can we debug however we do, I don't know, DevOps or production releases or whatever it is? I think all of that's so applicable and so useful. I wanted to come back to something that you mentioned there as well, feedback quite early on. We do tend to reject it.
Yes.
And I think even though a lot of software engineers, we like to say we're rational, we're calm, we're people, we're human beings, we're emotional just like everyone else. we have bad days and we get grumpy, or we have stressful days where we're depressed and we cry, we moan, or we, you know, however we let that frustration or that, you know, emotion out, we do. And quite often we hurt ourselves and other people in doing it. And I wanted to highlight one thing that I keep telling my kids. I think there's a great quote, apparently from Eleanor Roosevelt. Is that nobody can make you feel bad without your permission. We all need to remember that. Is that, as you say, it's information that we get, that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It could be wrong. It could be the other person is having a very, very bad day and is lashing out with their emotions, and it's nothing to do with you. They're just having a bad day.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's
Yes.
information. You can take it in and you can go, well, is it valid?
Mm-hmm.
Is it partially valid? Is it completely invalid? You may decide it's completely invalid, but after you then get that from 10 different people in 10 different emotional states, maybe you can reflect, well, actually, is my view, is my biases that are rejecting this invalid, because now I heard that from 10 different people, so maybe it's
Maybe there's
my view
something
that's
to
wrong.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, I think that's so true. It's easy to reject that feedback. It's easy to feel very emotional, but we should remember that it's just data. So I love that way of you putting it.
So actually, as you were speaking, I was kind of going through my book, Brain Refactor,
Cool.
that, that talks a lot about, there's a whole chapter about feedback. And one of the things that, if it's okay, I would like to read, talks about why we don't like feedback.
Sure, go for it, please.
Feedback is critical for growth, whether that's personal or career growth. Still, the reality is that we don't like feedback. We humans want to be loved, accepted, and appreciated for who we are. We want to belong, and we don't want to be rejected or criticized. Why? Because rejection and criticism used to be deadly. And then I make a reference for how I explained in the previous chapter the caveman configuration of the mind, which is the evolutionarily setup of how our minds are basically pre configured. So, back in the caveman times, criticism might have signaled a threat to your status within the group, leading to potential exclusion or diminished resources, which in turn was a threat to your survival. And a lot of the time, we don't even kind of connect the dots there. But if feedback comes across as, something that can that talks toward to those primitive instincts, I would call them, or survival instincts that we all have as humans, we don't even notice, but the psychological defenses go up, and we don't even want to talk to the person anymore. We might want to engage in, fight or flight or freeze response modes, which is, again, it's evolutionarily pre-configured and how our human minds and bodies work. So if we can see or notice we're receiving feedback, feeling uneasy about it, just kind of remind yourself, okay, this is just a physiological response to a threat. But is this feedback really threatening me? Maybe I can use it to grow. And that's how you lower your own defenses to be able to allow that feedback in and grow from it.
There's a crucial leadership lesson there as well. If you're leading people and you're giving feedback to people who are subordinate to you, that immediate power difference means you're triggering that kind of survival instinct of, hey, this is somebody that has power over me. Even if they're not going to exercise it, the simple difference in hierarchy is going to mean that you're triggering that. So if you are a leader giving somebody feedback, you need to think about that consciously and think about how you can manage that. Otherwise, your feedback's going to struggle to land because you've already got that barrier that's created.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to pick up there is you mentioned growth. And one of the things we need to remember, I mean, too often we forget, and I've been very guilty of this in the past, is that we grow best with feedback. And we don't grow through positive feedback. Good boy, well done. Nice work, John. Yeah, it's nice. What can I do with nice work, John? I
If
can't
anything,
do
it
anything.
reinforces who you are, right?
Yeah, so it's nice, it enforces it, but hey, John, that was good. Here's some ways you can improve it. That's actionable. That I can use it. So again, if I lower my barriers and be open to that, I can improve. Equally, if I lower my barriers and get somebody come back and go, "Hey, John, you sucked at that. That was absolutely abysmal." Okay, the delivery's not nice, and it might sting for a moment. But if I, go back to Roosevelt quote of "Don't let it make me feel bad," I can look at that and go, "Well, did I? Did I not? Can I objectively measure that? Are their suggestions useful?" And one of the best lessons that I learned was from some negative feedback, where I looked at what the CEO in this case gave me as negative feedback, and I went and Googled some of the stuff that he said because I didn't know enough about it. Turned out every single thing he said was wrong. However, what mattered was what his perception was, how he felt about things. And it opened my eyes to the fact that it didn't really matter that he was wrong. We were having a communication, and his perception was right to him. And if I wanted to work effectively with him, I needed to change what I did. So I started changing what I did, and I started working a different way. And that's had a huge impact on my life. And that's why I now promote emotional intelligence and soft skills to people. So that feedback was totally wrong, but it was useful. When I took away the emotion and went and slept on it and looked it up. So have you come across people that have had that same reaction, or is that one of the things that you help people with a lot?
Yes, I do help people, but I've also struggled it with myself at one point in time. So, as that senior software engineer that I was before I transitioned into coaching, I moved from Poland to United States, specifically North Carolina, which is the southern belt where people are very nice when they communicate. And I came from an Eastern European background, being very direct, to the point, not, fluffing around the corners. And it took a long to sink in that I was, even though my intention at heart was good, I was coming across as a person who was rude, aggressive, and people didn't really like to work with me because they haven't had work with so many Eastern Europeans, maybe they didn't understand. But that particular background shaped me to communicate the way I did. I heard that feedback from many different sources. And it wasn't until I ended up in that therapy where I opened myself up for receiving feedback that I realized, okay, maybe I can do something about my communication skills. Maybe they are a little bit poor and haven't been adjusted to this situational setting where now I'm in a completely different culture that has completely different expectations that are very hidden because nobody talks about it. And I did improve massively my communication skills to the point that because of my communication skills, I wasn't getting promoted to a team lead because let's be frank, I was coming across as arrogant and rude, and people were like, I don't want to work with that person being my team lead. And once I improved my skills, I did receive an offer to step into that role. So I could tell, wow, what a massive difference it was just because I improved how I communicated. I changed my mindset about how communication looks like and what were the things that I was doing wrong. After I improved them, they had a really big impact on my career. And today, as a coach, I help people see that. A lot of the time, especially with senior engineers who are hitting that plateau in their career and they're not getting promoted, lack of the people skills, the soft skills, is what's holding them back. But a lot of the time, they don't want to even see it. So the first thing, if someone is in that position, is working with me, is I help them see. I help them change their perspective and really understand that they are having these mindset and skill set gaps that have to be filled in order for them to step into that next level.
Cool, yeah. I want to pick up on that in a minute, but yeah, looking at the move to North Carolina and your example there, again, I'm in the UK, I've worked with a number of Eastern Europeans, and yes, it's culturally quite direct and quite blunt, and I really like that because I'm fairly similar. I've equally faced problems where some people I work with have liked that, some people I work with have hated that. And it took me longer than I'd like to admit to realising that I viewed it as like, I'm blunt, honest, call a spade a spade. Well, great. Some people like that, some people don't. I like it. It's not for everyone. And I can't go around expecting everyone to change for me. That's unrealistic. So if I wanted to work with other people and progress, I had to change my approach. I had to realize what they liked and adapt my style. And your example there is great in that, when we move to a different culture or when we deal with different people or we move to a different company that might have a different culture, or we move to a company that's got, offices all over the world and in, very different culture in different international areas, we need to adapt. That's part of the soft skills, isn't it? Is that we need to appreciate everybody's different and we need to find a way of working with people. So what worked brilliantly in one environment might not work very well elsewhere. Which brings us to that soft skills. Key things are communication and that adaptability. And I absolutely agree with you. So often it's the soft skills that hold you back. Certainly was for me early in my career. And I like to point out now and emphasize to people that your technical skills will get you maybe to being a senior. Beyond that, they're a hygiene factor. They need to be good enough, but as you go past that senior, you need the soft skills. You're going to be
Exactly.
influencing people. You're going to be communicating with people. So how do you help people come to that realization without banging their head against a wall like I did?
Well, the first thing is I have a different approach, right? So, John, you mentioned I need to adapt, right? If I tell my clients, you need to change, what that's going to do? Nothing good, right? It's going to raise their psychological defenses and they'll be like, why do I need to change? Why not everybody around me changes, you know?
Yeah, I was totally like that.
I know, and I see it all the time. And at one point, I was just like that too. But here's the thing, you cannot control other people. The only person you can control is you. How you interpret the events, how do you respond to events, and what do you do moving forward? Do you build new skills? Do you gather new knowledge? Or do you operate from the same status quo that is causing you all that frustration? So I help my clients develop this sense of agency, that they have a way to do something about those frustrations that they're facing on a daily basis because they're this smart SME, subject matter expert, and everybody ignores their ideas. They're this person that have awesome process improvement ideas and nobody wants to listen or implement them, right? So when I'm able to help them change the perspective that we can work on the things that they can control, like filling in the mindset and the skill set gaps that they probably have that are causing those frustrations, they're much more willing to change things. So, the perspective of how you want to go about personal growth is critical here, because you want to come to a place with a client. As a coach, I want to come to my clients with to a place where they're accepting and willing to take feedback in and take small iterations and change some things. It could be a small perspective shift. So, for example, we were just talking about working with people from different cultures. There's a phenomenal tool that I use with my clients, which is called Hofstede models. And it essentially explains how people from a certain country think as a culture. Of course, it doesn't apply to every single person, but I found that it was a very good description of how I, as a person who grew up in Poland and was raised in Poland, moving to United States, how I was experiencing this cultural clash that I wasn't even aware of in terms of communication, right? And so looking at the Hofstede models, whenever I work with my clients who have immigrated or work with immigrants or across different time zones, it helps them understand that their base setup is this, and people that they work with base setup is something else. And we find the things that are common, we find the things that are different, and we practice how to communicate those differences, right? And that helps tremendously, because what I'm doing with my clients is I help them game the system by using what's within their control.
Yeah, that's wonderfully put. Again, it's all about, as you say, that agency that we can control ourselves. We have full control over ourselves. And it's so much easier to change ourselves because of that than it is to try and change other people. which is
Exactly.
phenomenally hard. So you talked a little bit about how you work then. I was going to ask about what is your process, because you describe on your website 6 different sessions you work through. I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about that and how that works and how people work with you.
Yes. So whenever I get clients that are coming to me, it's typically because they're facing some sort of problem or obstacle. And I have this engineering career level up program that I developed as I've worked with engineers in various stages of their career, from an IC through a team lead, an engineering manager, a VP, to a CTO of a small or medium sized startup. And these are kind of like building blocks that we work through. But really, when I work with clients, it's highly customized to their needs and their particular situation, right? So, for example, the the 6 steps, I don't go through them with everyone because not everybody needs all the 6 steps, if that makes sense. I want to make sure that as I work with my clients, they are positioned for success and get only the pieces that they need in order to move forward and grow. So the 6 steps that you are mentioning, that you have mentioned a moment ago, are essentially, in the first step is understanding who you are and what you want. So of course, when someone comes to me, they have like this high level perspective of what they want. But here we get to this nitty gritty and we really dive into what are their values. And a lot of the time I find that whenever people are going through their life on autopilot, without really thinking through about what it is that they want, but they kind of fulfill those family, parental, societal expectations that are being put on them, then that a lot of the time leads to unfulfilling life, right? So you have maybe a great paycheck, a great job, and you wake up every day feeling like, oh, I hate it, right? And that's how I felt when I was burning myself out back then in that situation that I described earlier. So I totally relate, right? And as I went through therapy and defined my values with my therapist, it was mind blowing understanding that the things that I truly valued were not necessarily things that I was taught to value, right? So, what I wanted in my life was a lot of flexibility and freedom to spend the time that I have on earth with people that I love, that I care most about, not necessarily sitting in meetings and figuring out project deadlines or creating roadmaps, right, for something that I didn't deeply care about. So a lot of the time, this is eye opening, but it's really critical because as we are coaching together, I need to know what is my client's northern star, like the true north, right? Because when I know your true north, John, this is how I can guide you and help you get there, because I am providing that third party perspective that is telling you, hey, John, this is your goal. Why are you going in the opposite direction? Right? Let's talk about it, think about it, and kind of like reflect
I
what's
can
happening
imagine
there.
that that is incredibly useful on its own for a lot of people. As you
Yes, it
say, so
is.
many of us are going through life going, well, I was brought up, get good grades at school, go to university, you know,
Yeah, get a
do
job, get a
this, get a good
mortgage,
job, blah, blah, blah.
retire,
And
live after you retire.
yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I can see that being so useful for many people. So then what's then step two? You've got your North Star, know where you're going, realize it's not where you have been going, but it's where you want to be going. What
Yes.
next?
The second step is transforming your transforming your thought processes, right? So here we dive into that caveman setup I mentioned earlier when I was reading a piece of my book, because I want you to understand how the human brains evolve to work, right? Having this robotics background, I see human beings as systems and brains as systems as well. And I have this kind of system design thinking when it comes to making decisions, how we operate. And you have to understand what are some standard operating procedures that are sitting here that are guiding everything that you do on every day, because a lot of the things that we do are automated, right? We don't even think about it, right? We create habits, and those habits include what it is that we do and how we think. So you could be, believing that the world is out there to get you, and that's a habitual mental pattern. what I do in the second step is I help my clients understand their thought processes better and spot the ones who are holding them back, who are stopping them from getting to that next level, right? So for this one client who, as we worked together, he had this big dream of being a CTO of a startup. And as we worked together, he was an underappreciated senior engineer, right? And within literally 3.5 months, we got him to a position of being a CTO of a small startup. So for him, dream come true. But the first thing that we had to address was that he did not believe that he was worthy of being a CTO of a small startup. So we had to like analyze those thought processes and point out what was really not true, what was just a conditioning of the past.
So is it that lack of self-belief is the biggest problem that you see people facing, or is there a different challenge they have?
When it comes to things like imposter syndrome or lack of confidence, that's the very big step, right? Rearranging your thought patterns from the ones that are weighing you down to the ones that are building you up. And I have a set of exercises that I recommend to my clients as a part of their homework so they can start changing it. Because here's the thing, brains are highly plastic. There's neuroplasticity happening from the day you are born to the day that you die. So you could be 90 and you can still be improving your brain, right? And how that happens is by changing your habits, by repeating new actions or new thought patterns. And that changes your brain. Over time, that new thought pattern becomes automated and becomes a part of who you are, what you believe to be true about yourself. It becomes a part of your identity. And that's the goal here, is figure out which parts of your identity bits as my client are not working for you, are working against you, are holding you back from reaching for what it is that you're trying to reach for. And once we figure this out, we can refactor that. We can reprogram it and we can put in the work that replaces those buggy lines of mental code.
Cool. So how do you go about that then, making that transformation in step 3?
So one
So
of the exercises I absolutely love is called mirror exercise. And I want you to do it, John. And I invite everyone listening to do the same thing. The mirror exercise is a very simple exercise where every day at night you look yourself in the mirror and you give yourself praise. You are trying to find the things that you did good today. It could be as simple as you got out of bed, John, today. You're great, right? It could be as little as you were present with your kids today, Dagna. That's amazing. And the reason I want you to create a habit of noticing good things in your life, it's because it activates or sets up this part of your brain called reticular activating system, which is like a filter of what you perceive in your reality. And a quick step back here, our brains are bombarded with information all the time. So the tiny little bit that gets passed to our conscious mind, which what we think, what we notice throughout the day, it's just like a small piece of reality. And our brains are wired to notice the negative, to notice the things that are potentially deadly, to worry. And this kind of noticing good things is counter evolutionarily thing to do, right? But it is a building block of your confidence. You want to notice yourself doing the good things. So you
yeah,
believe that you can do those things more and more in the future.
I can imagine that's very positive. I think I probably find myself doing more of the opposite though. I
Yeah,
notice,
because that's what we do as humans. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, absolutely. But I tend to more notice and reflect on the negative things and what did I do badly? But then I add on to it, and what can I learn from that? How could I improve? How could I be better tomorrow? And I think, well, I've always reflected that that's a useful thing for me. I've sought out criticism. I've told people I'm blunt, I can take it. So I guess one of the frustrations I have in a lot of my career is not getting that blunt feedback. I want people to be very blunt with it. So I focus that way, and maybe I'm just weird that I prefer to now that focus on what went badly and how can I improve it.
So if that makes sense, right? Because you're looking at it from the information perspective, right? You're
Yeah.
thinking from your prefrontal cortex, right? You're thinking about my behavior is problematic. How do I fix it? What's the problem here to solve? What I'm inviting you to do is to activate a different part of your brain that works automatically, that works in your subconscious, right? That reticular activating cortex that I mentioned before, because you will it will change how you see the world, right? And it will help you notice certain opportunities that you're looking out for. So with this exercise, another thing that happens, so you're starting to notice different things about you or the world around you, is it allows to create a counter evidence, right? So for example, let's say you live a certain way your entire life, right? Like liking to get that blunt feedback, that going straight to the point, even if it's negative. And now, as you go through the exercise, you notice that you're much more at ease taking compliments because they're nice. And that feels awkward at first, but then you become more and more at ease with that. What happens is you're building confidence and you're becoming much more at ease when it comes time to self market yourself, right? To talk about your accomplishments, to stand in your own glory, right? To toot your own horn. So many engineers I worked with and high performance that have that kind of way of thinking, similar to yours, John, they have a really hard time marketing themselves because of that kind of approach, right? Because it feels that whenever you're talking good about yourself, like you're doing something wrong, like you're trying to cheat people or deceive them or, stuff like that, which isn't really the case. So,
Yeah, we tend not to like self promotion, do we?
exactly. But then how do you get that next level promotion if you never talk about yourself being worthy of it or asking for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we should all be doing the mill exercise. The other thing I was thinking there, maybe you can tell me if I'm right along here, is that if you are suffering from that negative feedback, maybe you're starting to get worn down or depressed by it, that positive affirmation every evening when you look in the mirror could be quite positive for making you feel better about yourself, making you feel more comfortable just brushing it off. It's information, as you put it, rather than something you have to believe. And that might give you a better, more positive disposition, and again, then help you get on better with people and show better soft skills because you're, say, more confident in yourself. You're happier in your own skin. I'm going to find it easier to be, say, more tolerant of other people. And instead of growling at that junior engineer for that PR that you think is wrong, you might be a bit more, hey, there's another way. Have you tried this? So, yeah,
Exactly.
all those small changes can add up. So, I can see that working well. So,
I believe we were on the second step. Do you want to
yes,
dive
we
into
sort of,
the
well, I
others?
sort of moved forward onto the transformation and sort of jumped the gun a bit and maybe didn't give you a full chance to talk about transform. So, where should we pick up? Should we pick up from step 3 of transform or
Yes,
step
let's
4
go.
with
We talk
acing your
about the
job?
first and the second steps, which first we are understanding that North Star, who you are, what you want. Then we start transforming your own thought processes to invite that change, to notice that you are a result of your lived experience. So, in order to change things about you, you need to question your thoughts and beliefs, basically. And in the third step, we are helping you transform how other people see you, right? So, one of the things that I like to hand out in this step, especially when I work with engineers and all the analytical people, is that we are taught at school to overvalue technical skill set, right? And then the people skill set, the soft skills, are kind of like on the lower end, that are either like completely missing from the curriculum, or you kind of learn them haphazardly. If you're lucky and have a good team, you might learn it. If you're not, then you might not. So we are here figuring out like how you can improve how other people see you, right? Like to rebalance the scales between the technical and the non-technical skills, and to understand that it's important to promote yourself, to take steps so you can be seen as the valuable professional that you are, right? Because you might know it inside, but if you haven't talked about it and told other people, they might not be aware at all, right? A lot of the engineers I work with have this limiting belief of my work speaks for itself. Well, guess what? Your CEO is not lurking into the code base trying to figure out what you did 2 days ago in that commit that you made, right? They don't know, they don't care. So as long as what you did didn't break business, you'll be fine. So it's really, again, about shifting this perspective on how do you help others notice who you are, right? And how do you do that with integrity? So we talk here about marketing yourself, about your communication skills, about setting expectations, about setting boundaries. And that's really what we focus in the step number 3. Now, I'm going to kind of quickly go through because I want to be mindful of the time that we have here today. The fourth step that I usually go through with my clients is talking about how you can ace your job while avoiding burnout. And it's really about understanding how your circadian rhythm works and which hours in the day you are your most productive. Because once you double down on doing the most impactful work in the time when you're most productive, that's how you go far. That's how you run laps around other people and get skip level promotions. Really, you have to be aware of what's the work that you're doing that's most impactful and how do you put it in your calendar so you maximize your own capabilities, because we are not working at the same level at 8 a.m. and at 8 p.m. And it's highly individualized, right? So someone who can be highly productive at 8 a.m. and is, for example, stuck in meetings will be able to achieve much less than the person who is able to do their highest productive work in their highest productive hours, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always been a morning person. You know, so I've very often been in the office at 7 in the morning. It's great. I miss the commute. I get a couple of hours of really productive work done before anyone else turned up, and that's the time that suited me because I was awake then, and that's when I'm willing to go. So that always worked beautifully for me. So your final one then is companies that fit.
Oh, we skipped soft but essential skills, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry, we did. So let's
I
talk
mean,
about the soft skills and companies
we
that
did
fit then.
talk a little bit about setting boundaries and expectations, and that's a big part of it. But here we focus more about communication and becoming this kind of teammate that everybody wants on their team. And in my book, I explore this concept of how a lot of engineers like to be lone wolves and how they can shift their mindset to becoming master collaborators. Because a lot of the time, it's not always what you do, it's how you think about collaborating with other people and understanding, again, how to game the system, how to make sure that you get what you want out of your career by playing the game correctly.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of us do have that kind of lone wolf mentality, and it's a team sport. You know, what we build these days is so big and complex, you can't do it one man on your own or
I
one
know,
lady on
but
your
it's
own.
easier to hide behind a computer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, guilty of it myself. One of my you know, dreams about becoming a software engineer is I could just go to the office, sit in front of a computer, type into it, I wouldn't have to deal with people because people are difficult and awkward and emotional, and I'm logical and I can just focus on the computer. I can tell it 2 plus 2 and it'll give me 4. It won't. I'm having a bad day. Don't want to do that. But
I totally get it.
the world doesn't work that way, does it? So we have to learn to work with other people and collaborate.
So, there's a big misconception here, too, that a lot of engineers end up being engineers because they're introverted. But my take on it is that introversion is not an excuse for lacking skills, right? And if you are having trouble dealing with other people, it's because you lack skills, not because you're introverted, not because you're extroverted. It doesn't matter. Your personality trait in that sense is how you recuperate energy. So, do you
Yes.
feel more energetic when you are around other people, or do you feel more drained? But again, it has nothing to do with your skills. If you haven't put in the time to master the skills that are required to deal with other people, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, I love the way you put that there. I've always regarded myself as being introverted, Doesn't mean I'm shy. It doesn't mean I can't do it with people. It means that I find it exhausting, particularly in I would say a big group, but 3 or 4 people. I don't really like big groups. I'm very happy to talk to people one to one. I will talk their ear off about anything that we have a mutual interest in. But a big group, I find that too exhausting. And you're right. My issue there wasn't, for my own perspective, it wasn't that I was an introvert. It was that because I'm an introvert and didn't like those situations, I avoided them. So I then didn't practice the skills. So I then didn't develop them. And again, it's not through being an introvert, it's through going, well, this is difficult, don't like it, not good at it, not going to do it. You say, kind of running away from developing the skills and acknowledging that weakness. And it's a change in mentality that, we
Mm-hmm.
talk about in your session one, understanding who you are and so on. Like I went, I've got to change. I've got to do this. If I want to progress, I have to work with people.
Exactly.
Cool. Does that bring us to companies that fit now?
Yes.
Cool. I'm
So
curious
with
about that.
companies that fit, the typical approach is essentially to check out any job boards that have currently open applications and apply to them, right? That match your tech stack skill, right? And the way I like to approach it is to put it on its head. So basically, once we understand what your values are, what it is that you care about, what makes you motivated, what kind of makes you tick, then we try to figure out what are some companies that fit. So, what are the companies that align with your values, that do things the way you are more inclined to do? And here's why, right? So, we understand what is the place for you where you can be your best, because you're tapping into your intrinsic motivation, you're tapping into your values, you're much more likely to be in a flow state, you're much more likely to be excited in an interview setting, not because of the benefit package, but because of you're contributing to something greater than who you are. And it feels good to be part of something that's bigger. And a lot of the time, what I see is that it's a little bit more work in terms of like researching the companies that you're genuinely excited to work about. But what happens is those kinds of companies, whenever they do open their positions, my clients get in pretty quick. So just last year, we're at the point of recording, not in the best economical state for software engineers. There's been layoffs, there's been people losing jobs. But with this approach, I've had a client who got let go, took 2 months to essentially focus on his health and family. And then he found a job really quickly following that particular process, because when he went through the interview round, he was not only qualified, but he also was genuinely excited about the position. And whenever you apply and you're genuinely excited and you can show that, you are a much better investment for that company, right? So we're no longer in a place where people will be job hopping every 2 years, I don't think. And from the company perspective, whenever they hire talent, they want to retain you for as long as humanly possible. So if you are excited, if you match what it is that they're trying to accomplish, you are much more likely to stay there for a long time. You're a better investment than someone who's there for other reasons, basically. And, you're more excited to work there as well.
So I can hear some criticism already of this,
Yeah, go ahead.
and and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I can hear the natural criticism is that it's just a job. I don't want to work A, B, or C. I want to get a paycheck because I have hobbies, I have a family that I've got to support. I need to earn money, and I work to earn or I work to live rather than I live to work. Um, and I think that's in a way a valid view. But what we miss in that view, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is that the hiring manager as a person, they're not necessarily looking for you to come in and be a massive fanboy of the company or whatever, but they want to work with somebody that they can relate to, that they feel is going to do the job well. And if you come across with that enthusiasm and excitement, you're going to come across and give that impression of that. Now, they're probably not going to believe that it's been your mission since day one, since you were born, to come and work at company XYZ. But if they feel you're enthusiastic about the role and you're keen on it and you can't wait to get going, it's that human emotion again, isn't it? We've got those natural biases that if somebody comes in and goes, oh, I don't know. Yeah, I'd like to work here. We're going to
Right?
have a
That's not
very
exciting
different
at all.
energy from, hey,
Exactly.
Dagna, love what you're doing at Mindful Dev. I really want to work with you. It's just that we don't necessarily have to be as over the top as that, but it's that energy is going to be very, very different, isn't it? And we're humans, we respond to it. What do you think of that?
I totally agree. So it's not that you have to be a fanboy of the company, but it's more of the alignment of what it is that you want to do that genuinely excites you that this company is already doing, right? So it's again, we're flipping the script. We're not looking how you can fit into a company. We're looking for companies that fit you, what you want to do in life, right? And for people who are very genuinely not excited about working for anyone, that typically comes in our very first session. And they realize they want to pursue entrepreneurship. And then we explore how that might happen. So, the things the objections that you have raised for companies that fit typically are already addressed in our very first step. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've taken up a lot of your time, Dana. We've overgone our hour. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you'd like to share?
I loved being here, John, and I so appreciate you for bringing me here. For anyone else listening, if you want to get in touch with me, and I highly recommend reaching out to me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people there. You can shoot me a DM if you like the conversation. Let me know what resonated the most. Or you can pick up my book, Brain Refactor. It's available on Amazon. It hit a bestseller status last year whenever we launched, and I'm super excited for the potential impact it can have on people's lives because I've been getting DMs that it literally changed their whole perspective about their career, just reading a book, not even working with me. But if someone is interested in working with me, if you shoot me a DM on LinkedIn, I'll let you know exactly what are the steps for us to potentially work together.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, Dana. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.